Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the knowledge sharing session this morning on ADB's first policy based loan on climate change. In the last 2 to 3 weeks, our region, and in particular the Philippines, has had successive super typhoons. And the recent flooding in Pakistan only demonstrates that climate change is a development challenge that we need to contend with for a long, long time. So, to set the context for this morning's conversation, may I invite on stage the Director General for the Southeast Asia Regional Department, DG Ramesh Subramanian.
A very good morning to all of you. Thank you so much. It's actually so nice to be in person. I think this is my first public in-person meeting. We had a board meeting last week, which is really good after 2.5 years. So very, very happy to see all of you. Well, the photo that you see here, it's actually quite appropriate for the Philippines, but also for many other countries. In addition to the climate challenges that was mentioned, particularly Philippines, but also Indonesia, many countries in Southeast Asia region particularly, but across Asia and Pacific, they are devastated by various events, natural catastrophes, typhoons, tsunamis, and so on. But food security is also another major concerns. Now, I'll just share a couple of points. You'll hear from the experts, starting with Diana and Bedat, but also other colleagues who will come in later. They've been doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting for the climate PBL, which is the focus of this session. What really led us to this program? What was kind of happening? In addition to this, in addition to the various things that you see in Southeast Asia, first and foremost, looking back last year, this time, a lot of work. I'm looking at the core team leaders, well, the two of them here, and I think Omar probably is also online. The commitment that the Philippines government brought to this was phenomenal. Clearly that provided a very strong impetus. We were all, looking at the work that had been underway, the quote unquote technical compliance, given that this is a policy-based loan that was emerging, but more importantly, the passion that the work that had been done, they wanted to leave a legacy. As you may know, last year at 2021 to mid-2022 was the final months of the outgoing administration, but they wanted to make sure that that commitment got kind of memorialized and crystallized. So that was quite outstanding for us, and we did not want to lose the momentum. The second was President Massa's ambition, the 100 billion ambition. That was a clear, nice kind of rallying call for all of us in Southeast Asia, but as well as across the bank. So we started anticipating that this is coming. We started thinking, how do we really, prepare ourselves? What is it that we can start with? What is it that we can deliver? And third, closely linked to, I guess, both of these was the COP26 momentum that was also there. And actually that COP fever, I see Toru here, who knows COPs much better than I do. But the pressure, or the nice pressure, the positive pressure that's been built up over the last year and a half, that's been phenomenal. So the COP26, particularly in the Southeast Asia context, we launched two things. One was the Energy Transition Mechanism, or the ETM platform with President Massa and the Finance Minister of Indonesia, Minister Sri Mulyani, and Secretary Dominguez joining together on stage, with a lot of other senior officials, including Secretary Janet Yellen of the US giving her words of support, and UK coming in, many others coming in. And then we also launched the Green Recovery Platform, Naida here and Anuj, and colleagues from our Southeast Asian Innovation Hub had worked on quite a bit on that. So all of these things gave momentum. Now, what happened before and what is happening now, before I pass it to Diana, what happened before, I'll kind of look back to 2009, 2010, we set up the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund in Southeast Asia. The fund itself is largely a sovereign fund, the first of its kind, with equity contributions coming from the 10 ASEAN countries in ADB. The fund had done good work, but small. It was only about 500 million equity contributions, not much of a leveraging given the operating model. So we came to 2015, 2016. So the question was, okay, what next? How do we kind of rejuvenate? How do we build momentum for regional cooperation through our infrastructure development through regional cooperation in ASEAN? Bless a guy who's actually no more, a senior official from Malaysia. Malaysia is the major contributor shareholder in the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund. This person, Dr. Sundaran, suggested, look, we need to, green focus is kind of beginning to emerge. You have things like the Europe deal. Why can't we think about something in ASEAN? Why can't we use the AIF? Why can't we kind of build a new phase, a rejuvenated phase for AIF? Let's start thinking about green finance. That was actually a big impetus. And thanks to Anuj and Anuj Mehta, who's the country director in Thailand, NAIDA, the Innovation Hub colleagues, the ACGF, the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, was born in work was done from 2017 to 2019, and the facility was established in 2019. Now, moving ahead, clearly these things have been very, very helpful. The natural disasters, typhoons, tsunamis, we all know, particularly in this region, but not just in Southeast Asia. The Pakistan floods that you mentioned, personally, myself, my journey with for ADB working with disasters started in 2004, the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami in Indonesia, where I used to be, 140,000 people killed. So the work that ADB did, we were very lucky. We got close to $800 million, all grant money. Our board was quite generous from our net income. The work that we started certainly was instrumental in terms of going for greater disaster resilience in our support, as well as building financial instruments or financial sector instruments. So disasters have been, unfortunately, stark reminders for us. So many typhoons that have happened, 2018, the Palu earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia. Now, food security is a major concern I mentioned. This also the Philippines, the PBL, the first PBL, has focused on. So broader climate transition, looking at adaptation, mitigation, resilience pathways, and also looking at how can financial sector be developed. There are certainly significant possibilities and potential that finance offers. So how can we bring all of this together? So these are some of the things that have been kind of behind the thinking and the work. And we are hoping that this certainly for Philippines will lead to further momentum, but also we are now, last point I'll make is we've been thinking about for the last about 7-8 months or so. We are calling it 3M approach. I know we can't patent it, but it is. The first M stands for mainstreaming climate into anything and everything that we do in a way like gender. Right? We've done, ADB has been quite phenomenal among the multilateral institutions. So the second M is mobilizing resources because significant resources will be needed. And the third M is messaging because we need to all of us understand the importance of addressing climate change, but the issues and the concerns vary widely across stakeholders. The concept of just making sure that the transition is just and that the transition is affordable. These are very, very important. So this messaging, the third M, is quite important. So we are now working on a fairly large technical assistance to kind of move ahead on all of these things. With that, without taking too much more time, I'm going to pass it to Diana and Bedat, who will start off in the first session.
Thanks very much, DG. That is the perfect introduction and context setting for our presentation today, because we are focused on the practical realities for processing teams. So thanks to DG for giving the larger context about where each of the departments are going, especially CERD. I'm Diana, joined by Ms. Badeth Advance. We have two other co-team leaders on this program, Neda Krishnamurgato and Omer Zafar, who also have a lot to share. We're doing this learning event because during processing, as well as just after, many teams across the bank were coming up to us asking for advice. How do we do a climate change PBL? And during processing, my reaction was don't do it. But we've distilled some more useful lessons since then. Again, we're focused on processing and the key decisions that relate to climate change PBLs, not necessarily how climate change plays in our lending philosophically or even in the Philippines specifically, but very practical advice for processing teams. Maybe. We only have about 15 minutes, so we're going to fly through some of the country context and an overview of the program. Again, we're going to focus on the unique decisions for climate change PBLs. I think most folks know, and DG said it very well, we are highly vulnerable to climate change here in the Philippines. What some folks don't know is that we have a very strong legacy of national policy as well as action plans on climate change here in the Philippines. The biggest problem is that we haven't reached implementation with these national policies. Here we also have robust ADB programming, projects, investments, TAs in some of the key sectors that are relevant for climate action. This is just a glimpse of that strong national framework on climate change. It started in 2009 with the first Climate Change Act. And you see progress all the way to 2021 with the nation's first nationally determined contribution, or NDC, with a strong commitment on greenhouse gas emissions reductions. But it was only 5 pages long. So a lot more context is needed, but fortunately there were the action plans that were developed. What we see from this is that here in the Philippines, it's a unique situation. We don't necessarily need new national climate change commitments. We have strong commitments. We need to focus on implementation. Here, our logical partner is the Climate Change Commission. This is their role to coordinate across agencies. But when it comes to processing a PBL, they don't necessarily have the same convening power of some of the other sector agencies. So when we get into more of the processing steps, we were able to work with both the Department of Finance as well as the Climate Change Commission in order to have that convening power and influence for a multi-sectoral program. This is just a quick hit list of why great climate policies haven't necessarily been implemented yet. First and foremost, sector plans don't yet add up to our climate change commitments here in the Philippines. There's not a comprehensive mapping of the climate relevant sectors to get there. Also, as with all of our DMCs, here a lot of the key actors lack capacity. So while we have maybe strong capacity in that national climate change policy realm, getting that down to the sector agencies, regional offices, LGUs, even farmers themselves on their practices is the challenge that we face. I mentioned that we have strong programming here in the Philippines in everything from low carbon transport, green and sustainable finance, clean energy, resilient cities, agriculture, natural resources management. So we have a strong base to build on. ADB is one of the strongest development partners here, but a lot of these climate relevant projects have focused on investment and project work and not necessarily the policy level. So we were able to work with our colleagues driving these important programs and leverage policy actions out of the multiple hardworking programs and colleagues that we have across CERD. Now we'll give a very brief overview of the program. Here's just a snapshot. One of the key things to notice here is in the title itself, the Climate Change Action Program. It's not a new national climate change policy. It's not on top of the NDC. It's focused on implementation and action. This became very important for us to communicate quite strongly later on in the review process. We took a programmatic approach starting in this year in 2022, subprogram 2 planned for 2024 with the potential for a subprogram 3 later on. The program contains so many hard-fought, exciting, and important policy actions that I would love to share, but we are limited on time. So I'll just highlight the reform areas, which are strengthening planning, financing, and institutional linkages for climate action. This gets at some of those institutional challenges as well as capacity issues that we highlighted in the constraints. Enhancing resilience to climate impacts. This is where we get at a lot of those important food security and adaptation work, especially in agriculture and natural resources. The third reform area is strengthening low carbon pathways. This supports the beginnings of a long promised energy transition away from fossil fuels and toward clean energy, public transport, and e-mobility. Here's an overview of the institutional structure. I know many team leaders will look at this and think, oh my goodness, there are so many implementing agencies. That's true. We think that this was only possible because we had 3 co-team leads coming from 3 different sectors with their own expertise and relationships within those sectors. Our team and our management are quite proud of the comprehensive coverage. I will caution other processing teams, it became a challenge under reviews as some of our reviewers are more accustomed to single sectors and it was difficult to wrap minds around. So it's part of that institutional learning. So just something to think about when you're looking at your coverage. So I've started to hint at some of the unique situations that we faced in processing the program, but for more detail, I hand over to Bideth.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, for the ADB processing of this PBL, one of the most challenging part, of course, is this climate change PBL is the first climate change focused program in the bank, and being climate change as a multisectoral thing that we need to, as mentioned by Diana, we have to have several sectors and we have to work with several sectors across the bank. And of course, the transition and timing of the first in the government sector. And indeed, it takes a village to be able to deliver a project or a program as multisectoral as the climate change. This PBL has benefited from the strong collaborations from different sectors across the bank. And it was led by 3 different team leaders from 3 different sector divisions, and which resulted in 3 directors, including the country director, signing off on every program review or step in the processing. Not to mention the multiple PAU and QA reviews from those sectoral division. While the 3 team leaders and the 3 directors took lead in project processing, the country director also took on the lead role in overall country level guidance. And this project, as I have mentioned earlier, has benefited through those expertise across the bank.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's a good point, but also something that teams need to think about going forward is, will there be a lead review and are there opportunities for efficiency in that review process for multiple sectors? Also, when you look at the slide, you notice we had a very large team. And again, I would love to highlight the incredible work of our colleagues across CERT as well as OPPP to take their program work, their project work, and leverage policy actions and commitments out of that. But here, I'll just highlight the participation of non-processing teams. We were very lucky to have SDCC as well as SPD join our team, which was important for us to have their input on their expectations and their guidance, as well as by our side as we're communicating with the onslaught of questions that we received in the review process. So that was very helpful. I will advise other teams as SDCC joins or perhaps OGC joins more and more processing teams, it would be great to be clear from the very beginning on what the expectations are for team membership. For many processing folks, we're used to spearheading documents, editing directly, taking responsibility for some of the due diligence documents. Some folks who are not accustomed to processing, it's a different set of expectations. So get those clear from the beginning. Another piece of advice is to seek clarity early on from SDCC and SPD, whether you're subject to the enhanced quality assessment for PBLs. We were lucky enough to spearhead the very first pilot implementation during our second interdepartmental review, which is fine, but it was a surprise and the procedures weren't clear at that point. So seek guidance early, whether you're subject to that, and allocate time and resources accordingly. As the first climate change PBL, we received a great deal of attention during processing, even more so because we were processing in the lead up to COP26. Because of this, we received many requests from board members as well as corporate management for special briefings on the program. This was just at our concept stage, so it was very early in processing. Just a few lessons that came out of that exercise. First, board members really appreciated the early engagement. They enjoyed having a hand in shaping the program. It was also very good for us to get feedback and calibrate the communication we were doing, and especially the performance indicators that we were thinking about to make sure that they align. We did find at the end of processing, because only certain board suites asked for special briefings, that some board suites felt left out. We didn't have a comprehensive program around communication at the concept stage. So if you're asked to do special briefings, think about the comprehensive coverage and what you're obliged to do to avoid those feelings. On the calibration of our expectations, I would say one of the most important learnings we had was the importance of NDC implementation to the board suites. Because our program focused on climate action within the sectors that had been identified and focused on implementation success, it was difficult for us to readjust and calibrate to the strong expectations for NDC implementation. It might be a vestige of just where we were in the timeline leading up to COP26 and countries going into negotiations thereafter, but certainly processing teams need to think about that storyline, whether or not it relates to your climate actions specifically, but it's an important piece of the storyline. As you might imagine, this process demanded a great deal of staff time. I'll just leave it at that. Finally, something important to consider for processing teams is that when we engaged early at concept stage, some opinions were formed at that early concept stage, and we found that later on in reviews when we had a final program, which was notably different from that concept stage, that some folks' thoughts and opinions were steeped in that early concept stage. So it's important to think about if you have that early engagement. Beth, on timing?
Diana. Yeah, as I have mentioned earlier, timing is one of the most challenging part in processing of this PBL. The program was conceptualized in March of 2021, while with the initial target of approval on the last quarter of 2023. But as discussions progresses, it was decided later on that it should be approved before the new administration comes in. And elections, the national elections happened in May 2022. So the management to be able to benefit from the momentum from the government on their focus on climate change, the management decided to push the program before the new administration comes in. And with that, we really had to, squeeze in, squeeze in the processing timeline for this program. And working on a very tight schedule, there were some detours that we had to take. Like, we conducted the consultation mission before the concept approval, which after the concept approval, we upgraded it into a fact-finding mission um, through a memorandum that should be approved by the management also. And of course, there were several requests to different departments, to different divisions for a shortened or parallel review, just to make sure that the milestones are met on time for the approval.
Thanks very much. Yeah, Beth and I used to joke that we would introduce ourselves to new people by saying, "Hi, I'm Diana. I'm sorry."
Yeah, I was also telling my colleagues that is already my expertise.
So here's an overview of some of the key climate change specific decisions in processing. So first and foremost, we hear from a lot of teams that have been asked to process climate change PBLs. I really hope that our management, our staff, and everyone keeps the country needs front and center. It's a great tool, but it might not be appropriate everywhere. So put the country's needs first and be prepared to defend it. We mentioned before, assess the NDC. Again, there are so many questions around accounting for NDC, especially because it's important to nations as they go into negotiations. It may or may not be appropriate, again, given your climate actions and focus, but it's a critical part of the storyline. The climate risks and needs of the country. Here we encountered a lot of different expectations. Because our policy actions are steeped in the sectors, with existing action plans identified, we focused on implementation. But what we found was that a lot of people come with strong frameworks expecting a comprehensive climate diagnostic rather than sector-specific diagnostics. We don't have institutional guidance yet on what's needed. I hope that number one, guidance will come, and number two, it will be tailored for the specific program. I don't think there's one size fits all. The last point here, before I hand over to Badath, is to think about your government partner. Again, I already highlighted how we brought a little bit more influence to the convening role of the Climate Change Commission by partnering with DOF as well and having a steering committee that was active from the very beginning. Over to you.
Again, this PBL was led by three different divisions, three different sector divisions, and the country office also taking the lead role. Though each division has different clearance procedures and protocols to follow, it was decided early on the early stage of the project processing, on which protocol or how we go about it. So those protocols or the internal arrangements and procedures of for each sector was agreed upon at the early stage of the project processing. Clearance procedure for each division might be internal and thus more flexible. However, systems applications like EOPS and MAS are different. In EOPS, for example, we cannot log more than one team leader. We cannot also tag more than 3 divisions as 3 lead divisions. In that case, when you generate the PAG or the project or the program at a glance, there's only one division that is reflected on the PAG. And consequently, for those 3 divisions and including the country office to be reflected in that PAG, we had to request ad hoc for the PAG to be edited so that the 4 divisions are reflected in that PAG. And this is also the same with MAS. There are no multiple PTL and the division's functionality in the MAS approval.
Thanks. Also thinking about the design process, it's an important decision for teams to choose whether they're going with a single sector or multi-sector, because it leads to some of the implications that Bideth was highlighting in processing. Finally, one of the most important decisions that teams have to make is on the focus of their program, which leads to their PDMF performance indicators. This is where we encountered very strong frameworks from reviewers and contributors about what a climate change PBL should deliver. Again, in the Philippines, we were focused on implementation and climate action and not another layer of national policy, but we did find a lot of expectations to measure either implementation of the NDC or what would be the theoretically best climate change policy for the Philippines to pursue, a sort of climate maximalist position according to the science. So focusing on action was important not only for our storyline, as well as the PDMF measurement indicators. And it's a critical piece for processing teams to think through. Just a little bit more detail on how we design the program, which might not be the way that other programs do it, but to choose our policy actions, we took a multi-criteria optimization. So again, these just highlight some of the frameworks that different reviewers came to the program review with, and we tried to optimize across the 4 of these. First is the climate imperatives. What are the greatest threats in the Philippines? We saw that adaptation and food security were among the most important, as well as transitioning to a low carbon development pathway. So from a science-based approach, what's most important? What policies are already in place? And again, this is where in the Philippines, we benefited from a strong national framework. ADB sector experience, where can we add the most value? Where do we have experience and where are we confident that we can push the boundaries and see success there? And then of course, development partner coordination. So where is our greatest value addition and where are our colleagues covering? Now, just a brief summary of those recommendations that we've already been through. Number 1, keep the country's needs front and center in your design work. Storyline, critically important, especially because for climate change, people come with very strong expectations and frameworks in their mind for what your program should deliver. So having a strong storyline from the beginning would be a huge benefit. Seek guidance early on your expectations for whether NDC accounting is required or expected in your PDMF indicators, requirements for your diagnostic, whether it's a climate change diagnostic or whether sector-specific assessments work. And then finally, the enhanced quality review process, whether you're subject to it and what that means for your team. Seek consensus on your program approach. So whether that is climate change maximalism, what's the theoretically best approach you can take, or focus on implementation success. And then discuss with your management and your team how you're going to respond if you receive special requests for briefings. And to close us out, Bideth.
With all the challenges faced during the processing of this climate change program in ADB, climate change being multisectoral and the timing and very tight schedule, flexibility on some procedures and guidelines is indeed very helpful. But of course, we cannot really deviate on the policy of the bank. So strong collaboration and coordination with OGC, SDCC, SPD, it's also very important. And especially on additional functionality of also for ADB systems applications like EOPS and MAS is also highly recommended. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Back to Jane.
Thank you very much, Diana and Bideth, for the comprehensive discussion of your experience and lessons learned from the very first PBL on climate change. At this point, we will shift the discussion to a broader discussion of PBLs in general. I'd like to invite on the stage our panelists. Please join me on the stage. And while they are walking, thank you. Thank you very much. Our first panelist specializes in green investment and climate policy in Asia, and since 2018 had been managing partnerships and innovative finance instruments for the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility. In a fora, she was asked to rethink development finance for climate, and she emphasized that development banks need stronger, intensive reporting systems and key performance indicators in climate, which I hope would be covered in our panel discussion. Please welcome Naida Krishna Morgado, infrastructure specialist on innovation in green finance for SCRD. Our second panelist has been working on disaster and climate resilience related issues since 2003. He worked with the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center from 2004 to 2012, and since then has supported ADB's disaster risk management policy and plan. In one of his insights featured in Development.Asia, designing a low carbon and resilient COVID-19 recovery, he did emphasize this economic trade-off between resilience and recovery interventions and ensuring that we still address climate change to sustain the gains. Please welcome Argo Sinha Roy, currently the Senior Climate Change Specialist in SDCC. And joining our panel also this morning is someone who leads ADB's Judicial Capacity Building Program on commercial and environmental and climate change disputes. She co-leads technical assistance and legal readiness for climate finance and climate investments. And most recently, she supported the enactment of the Fiji Climate Change Act. Hopefully, we can hear more about that during the discussion. In many of the works that she has done, she has observed that not enough attention has been paid to assessing the legal frameworks to help developing countries identify opportunities to optimize options for climate finance. Welcome on stage Christina Pat, Principal Counsel of OGC. So, colleagues, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We are in for a 20-minute rapid discussion on policy-based loan. So, as our experts had pointed out this morning, climate change cut across several sectors. It's multiple disciplines. So, Naida, the Climate Change Action Program's one ADB team is quite large with 3 team co-leads and is unique because it calls from different sectors. What strategies inform your team structure? What kind of forces did your team needed to manage?
Thank you so much, Mary Jane, and for the welcome, which took me a bit by surprise, especially quoting stuff I did at OECD. It was a while ago, so I was like, okay, where did that come from? So yeah, our team, as Diana pointed out, is a massive team. But what's unique to it, I think, is 3 co-team leaders. Not that that's unique. Actually, there are many projects in the bank that have 3 co-team leaders. But I think what's unique is that we divided up the work, all of it. We also divided up the responsibility and the accountability. So at one point of time in processing, you could call any of the 3 of us or Badet, and we could tell you where we are, where we're at, what we said to somebody, what we didn't say to somebody. And we really worked kind of seamlessly at that level. And I think the reason we worked really well together is because we had so much pressure to deal with that it was kind of, sink or swim kind of approach. So all came together, personalities and everything, and we had never worked together before. So I think that was kind of unique to our team, and it was a great example of teamwork. Why we chose this type of team structure? So as Diana pointed out, based on our early diagnostic, we knew that the climate change PBL for the Philippines was going to be multi-sector. But in order to have a lot of depth multi-sector, you need people who know the sectors. So the 3 people who did the initial diagnostic was Diana, Omar, and myself. And then based on that, we ended up taking on the program and led it together. So that was part of why we had the 3 team leaders. But we then had an expanded team, and that was for multiple reasons. One, again, was to really link well to ADB's operations and value added in the country. So we had team members from transport, we had team members from urban, from finance, from almost all the sectors where ADB was really active in the Philippines, so that we were able to leverage off investment projects in the pipeline that we have. And this, I think, is critical for PBLs. If we're not able to clearly link to and leverage off our pipeline and kind of bring those two things together, we lose our added value of being able to use policy to influence pipeline and vice versa. So that was one of the, I think, the key reasons behind our team composition. And the second one was really the fact that this is a climate change PBL. The first for the bank, we needed to have strong climate expertise on our team, including Orgo, for example, and others. And we're really grateful that we were able to bring those people in, as you know, who have crazy busy schedules, and this is not part of their day job, but they came in and helped us and pulled it off. And we needed that to really deliver. So yeah, that was kind of the dynamics.
Thank you, Naida. That's quite enviable. The left hand knows what the right hand is doing in ADB, which is unusual, but really. Argo, in your view, how does an ideal collaboration with partners and between teams in ADB look like to prepare for the next generation of climate PBLs?
Thank you, first of all. The next generation of climate PBLs are already on the make. So there's not really a generation to learn from. So it's very much a process. I have to say, in terms of collaboration, we have to be cognizant and upfront that maybe unlike many other institutions, our engagement in the climate policy space in many DMCs have not been in the center in the past. It has been in the periphery in many cases, but not always in the center. And moving forward, being a climate bank, we have to improve on that. So the collaboration with development partners should be early on. It should be seen as a continuous process of not just a one-off interaction to develop a linked document. And also it has to provide us opportunities where we see that collaboration is leading to something beyond the PBL. So if I just think, for example, specific development partners, I think partners that are engaged in the budget support space in the countries, specifically IMF and World Bank, is very, very critical in the context of climate PBL, because not only to ensure alignment and complementarity, also to ensure sequencing of reforms, which is very important for climate PBLs, because sometimes you might take a reform that might lock in risk, which others are trying to rectify themselves. So I think it's important that coordination happens very early on. And also UN agencies, specifically UNDP and United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, because for years they have been doing the policy work in countries, so we need to work with them and build on that. Internally, collaboration, I think I'd already covered everything, but I suppose the other side of the team, I can say that it's important, again, to engage the wider team early on. Also, the other team members should not see themselves as colleagues reviewing document. That's not very helpful, but rather do the task that's been given by the team leaders. I think that's important to do it. And again, it's a process, it's a learning thing. So we have to be open-minded. There will be differences, there'll be argument, that's all good, nothing wrong, as long as you're working towards a common objective of the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Argo. I think I really like the point that you highlighted, which is a good segue to my next question, on policy reforms taking center stage when it comes to climate PBL at this time, and the sequencing of reforms is also critical. So, Christina, can you provide one example where, being part of a team, OGC's interventions helped reinforce the impact of policy-based loans?
Well, thank you so much. First of all, thanks for inviting OGC to this important discussion. I think policy-based loans are a good way to harness our collective support to, help with government's reform efforts. And as many of you may know, OGC has a law and policy reform program, which we was institutionalized to implement Strategy 2030. So in addition to, the project support that OGC councils provide, we also have this additional line of services to provide law and policy reform. So that's really helping countries with legal and regulatory reforms, as well as the related capacity building. And more recently, we've been feeding into PBLs. And that's also, I think our role as project council has helped kind of figure out what type of PBLs are there and how we can contribute. So we've been collaborating with PARD, and that sort of emanated from one of our project councils who was working on a programmatic PBL, and one component was to improve the business climate. And she basically spotted that and linked us up with the PAR team. We were sort of on our way to do this reform. So basically, one of the constraints in investment climate, improving the investment climate, is effective dispute resolution for commercial parties and contract enforcement. So she basically, kind of alerted us. We got hooked up with the PARD PBL team, and we were able to time it with the subprogram 1 and 2, the various actions to help meet this reform, to basically create a legal regime for international commercial arbitration, so which is the preferred way to resolve commercial disputes, especially with foreign parties. So we were able to work with the PART team, OGC Council, in helping to design the policy condition, as well as drafting the condition, because I think with legal policy conditions, it has to be worded in a certain way. And then we worked with the government on the policy paper, signing on to this New York Convention, as well as drafting the arbitration bill. So that was a huge success. And I'm happy to report from that, it actually translated into a renewable energy project because, OPPP was providing a task mandate, and they were trying, so in the bid, in the tender, one of the, I guess, foreign lenders flagged as a material risk the lack of international arbitration framework. So they were a bit hesitant. So sort of through the reform, at the end, they got comfort that the, Palau signed on to the New York Convention, put in the Arbitration Act, and actually, provided financing for this, what was a solar and battery project. So it was actually turned into something concrete. And we also fed into Tonga PBL on the same reform, and we were able to feed into the joint donors matrix, as well as World Bank's PBL budget support to basically, I guess, address the twin shocks of COVID and Cyclone Harold. And currently, we're working actually with CERT, and CERT has been a really good partner and supporter of law and policy reform. And we're working with the Cambodian PBL team on trade and competitiveness. And they really, what was really helpful is that they approached this early, even during the concept. I guess, conceptualization. So it gives us enough time to come in on the subprogram 2. So the policy condition has to be done by 2024. That gives us enough time because, these types of reforms, they take a long time. It's not something, if you approach us right away, we could get it done. So, it's again about, improving the investment climate, and Cambodia is in the process of operationalizing commercial courts as a way to attract FDI, as well as develop the private sector. So right now we're working to help operationalize the commercial courts, but that's going to require law and training of commercial judges. But so that'll, from now to 2024, we're going to. So we have OGC has a separate TA that we're going to contribute to this PBL, and it's actually those two actions are policy conditions. But it was just so great that they, approached us early enough that we can actually assist. Thanks.
Thank you very much for those rich sharing, Christina. When it's very good to hear when you have spillovers, projects that are translating and supporting subsequent projects, and in that area, we do know that addressing climate change requires data-intensive preparations and diagnostics. So Naida, on the PBL's design and monitoring framework, what were some of your key considerations that you looked at in identifying performance indicators, and why?
Thanks. That's really the question of the hour. At least it was for the PBL. I think Diana mentioned it like 5 times during the presentation. It was a key concern for especially many board members. So the context in the Philippines is this. The NDC is super ambitious because they want to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030. But, there's a massive big but, out of that 75%, 72.xx% of those emission reductions have to be delivered with external financing, so not using domestic budget. So then in reality, it's a 2.5% emission reduction target that they've really committed to, and the rest of it is conditional. So the question we got, and that question will be the same, it'll be that same crux question you'll get for a different country. Like Indonesia, it'll be like, what about coal? So in the Philippines, it's like, what about money? And so the question we got every time is, so this PBL, 250 million, how much they're going to leverage, what greenhouse gas emissions reductions they're going to result in. With this 250 million budget support now, how much of this NDC, how much of it is going to be the 75%, 72%, 2%, 1%? How much of the percent is going to come out of this PBL? And that was a really massive challenge for a PDMF that's not really designed to do that. The PDMF is designed to measure the impacts and outcomes of a program that is about action. So we had a lot of work to do on communication. And what we ended up doing was revamping the PDMF to have two sets of indicators. One set of indicators that was really linked to the reform areas that we are tackling. It's an ongoing program, of course. And then we had some kind of key top level ones. Like if we've said we're going to improve the budgeting system in the Philippines for climate change, it means we need to see an improvement or an increase in climate budgets by XX%. If we've said we're going to improve NDC implementation, it means we need to see, as a result of our whole program, there are 10 more actions being implemented than there were before. So those are the kind of actions we developed from the team side. But then there was a massive discussion with the government and a negotiation because they couldn't understand why we were trying to add in these extra bits, especially when the NDC implementation plan wasn't firm. There was no NDC implementing monitoring framework. In fact, there still isn't one. So we were kind of trying to tackle this double approach. And I think that's a critical issue with climate PBL. So I think we managed it okay for the first one. But next time around, I think we probably need to engage the government earlier and also communicate better from the outset what you can and cannot deliver with 250 million of budget support.
Thank you, Naida. And we all know that at the back of those measures and targets is that we need to ensure there is sufficient preparation. So Argo, how do we know if sufficient analytical work and climate assessments are available, and with whom do we partner on those?
Sure, thanks. So I think, yes, if it's a climate change PBL, different sort of assessment is required. I'm not saying the assessment has to be new. It could be existing. You can build on that, but you have to approach it differently for three reasons. One is, I think climate has a longer term time frame. So unless you are really anchoring your reforms against that longer term understanding of risk, then there could be inadvertently, you can promote maladaptive practices. Second is, as Diana said many times, it is cross-sectoral, it is multisectoral, but the implications of cross-sectoral reforms are not limited to your national boundary. In many cases, it has impacts on other countries globally, on trade, etc. And I think third reason is that, again, Diana said, most countries have certain policies and plans, which has identified a whole bunch of priorities. So from those priorities, how do you find where should be ADB coming in and really adding value? And as Naida said, for the first $250 million, how do you make sure that the priorities that we are selecting are the most impactful in many cases? So for these reasons, I think an assessment is required. Now, in most countries will not have a comprehensive assessment in place, which I think fair enough, that's okay. You can build on what's already existing in the countries. Along with the assessment, I'm not just talking about a document. What is more important to me, I think, is the dialogue with the country governments. And that dialogue which brings multiple agencies together to think about a particular issue and how do you resolve the issue and what's the best reform to resolve it. But that dialogue is absolutely critical, I would say, throughout the process of implementation, processing as well as implementation. And the third is, I think, identifying national partners, specifically national think tanks, national policy research organizations, is very critical, because if we identify them as partners through this PBL, maybe we are also building their capacity in the long run to influence their governments for future reforms for which ADB may not be involved at all. So I think for me, that's kind of an assessment should not be seen as a one-off exercise just for doing the PBL, but rather a real process of engaging with country partners and build on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Argo. So as we have seen, that engagement cuts across different partners, cuts across different sectors. There's a lot of interrelationships when it comes to climate change. Christina, from your experience, and what was critical in these interventions from OGC to make PBLs transformational?
Well, that's a big question. But what I'm hearing is that with climate change, it's a systemic change. So I think PBLs are a good platform to basically transform towards tackling climate change, which requires support from outside. But perhaps I could highlight the role of the law. So I think different countries are at different stages. Philippines already had the framework climate change law in place, but it's also about implementation. And with implementations, there's got to be a lot of, details, meaning regulations. It's similar to, I guess, our, OMs implementing our policies. So, one of the key things that is important to, I guess, PBLs or transforming, tackling climate change is really to figure out if the country is legally ready. What is this legal framework? What's missing? What's overlapping? What's ambiguous? So that's one of the key assessments that we normally do. It could be, absence of a law, for example, renewable energy law, to provide for the uptake of renewable energy and technologies. It could be lack of building code or insufficiency of a building code. So I think, laws have, they can play a critical part, but it really depends on the country's situation. But again, laws are only good as they can be implemented and enforced. So I would say that it's also important to invest in environmental rule of law, and that means capacity building of the implementing parties, in particular judges. So basically OGC works a lot with judges because they basically make the decisions with huge sustainable development outcomes. We also work with law schools. Basically, we help to modernize their curriculum to integrate environment and climate change issues into their curriculum. So that's really has to do with, developing the next pipeline of policy experts, environmental climate change experts, disaster management experts. I think maybe I'll go back lastly to the framework climate change law, because that was sort of, one of the first things that Philippines did. And, framework climate change laws is a way to implement the NDC. And in fact, for Fiji, their enactment of the framework climate change law was part of their NDCs. And it's a way for them to set clear policy direction, basically giving investors and basically letting people know that we are committed to net zero. They actually, in fact, they hardwired their net zero commitment in a law. So that sends a strong signal. And one of the benefits of framework climate change law is that it provides the institutional coherence, and it basically, clarifies roles and responsibilities, because that's another reason that, a lot of institutions, they may have issues when it comes to disasters, even, or climate change or other issues, is that people have to really know their mandates, their roles. It has to be clearly defined in a law. Also, there's, other mechanisms to show that, that the government is really invested, and they invested in climate change. So that is the benefit. But of course, with any overarching broad law, there's got to be a lot of regulations. So currently, we're working with the Fijian government to identify. There's just so much to do, but just few aspects where we could help with the implementing regulations, and of course, the capacity building has to be continuous. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christina. I'm quite conscious of time. I know climate change is not, 1 hour is not enough to really discuss this issue. So we have a virtual audience of 100, close to 140. And we have a not full house, but we have a lot of warm bodies here at the K-Hub. So I would like to give the floor to any question from the audience before we close the session. Yes, Suzanne?
Yeah, so I have one question. I think it's also your question. What would you do differently if you had to process it again? Now I'm looking at you, Naida, because you're the only one on the stage.
Don't do it. It was a brief moment of weakness, Diana, when we said that, right? For lasting like 9 months. No, I would say, what would I do differently? Stronger climate diagnostic upfront, just because it makes it easier to defend. I'm proud of the work we did, and I defend it. I think it's solid. I have a climate background, but it would be much easier to defend to a broader audience if we had a paper which said, we did a 6-month diagnostic and here you go. That's what I do differently.
Okay, that's interesting. This comes back to how we make decisions. I mean, do we need data and evidence, or we need other tools to make decisions on how we communicate them? Diana, what would you do differently?
I would not do a climate diagnostic from the beginning. I would improve storyline. No, I'm just
Such a
kidding.
close team.
Yeah, I think assessing expectations. We were surprised at each stage of processing in I guess the strength and very strong frameworks that people come to a program on climate change with, and I think they're all valid. But the ability for people at ADB to assess a program as it is and for the role that it serves in a country, it requires a very strong storyline around that. So I think we could have done more consultation with different groups at the beginning of our processing to see some of these strong expectations. We adjusted to them as we went, but it would have been far easier to know those at the beginning.
All right. So,
The other question?
okay,
Do we have any from the virtual?
yeah,
Any virtual ones?
well, there's a lot of congratulations and a lot of gratitude for the lessons learned this morning from both our presenters and our panelists. And with that, I am, for anyone who has a burning question, you can easily reach our project experts and our presenters. And I'd like to thank Argo, Naida, and Christina for joining us in their panel session this morning. To close the session, I'd like to turn over the stage now to Susan Bra.
Yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, we are very happy that everyone agreed to this session. This is just the first of a series of learning events. We're also writing a case study with a team. We are working with NASA and their approach to case studies, where we are looking actually at issues and challenges, not the typical ADB case study where everything was perfect, but really looking at various angles so that these become learning cases. And I think I'm sitting here with great pride seeing the colleagues, and I think we are all ready to take over the bank, right? Why do we need? Because it seems we have actually good teamwork in place and the right kind of thinking, and we all know what needs to be done and what needs to change. And maybe to summarize this in 3 words, one is we need to have platforms to engage with governments and our counterparts. It has to be more than money. It has to be capacity development. We have to stay there for long term. It has to be partnerships. And the next thing is it's our responsibility also to build national capacities, to invest in think tanks, in universities, to do the work we are doing in OGC and leverage all of that together to stay here with our clients for the long term. So thank you very much for today, and we'll see you all again soon, and congratulations again. Thank you for being here.